Okay. Welcome to Calming the ADHD Chaos Summit on ADHD Brain Hacks for a Calm, Confident, Connected Family. My name is Laura Dawn, and I am your host. I am an ADHD warrior mama to two amazing neurodiverse boys and the founder of the ADHD Village. In today's interview, we will be learning about how calm can be your superpower. Joining us today is one of my personal heroes, Jennifer Colleri. Jennifer is one of the nation's leading parenting experts. She is a highly sought after international speaker and the founder of Connected Parenting. A child and family therapist with a busy practice based in Toronto and San Diego, Jennifer is also the author of Connected Parenting, How to Raise a Great Kid, and You're Ruining My Life, but Not Really, Surviving the Teenage Years with Connected Parenting. Jennifer is a frequent guest on many national morning shows, and her advice can be found in many Canadian and US magazines. Jennifer entertains and educates audiences with her powerful parenting model based on the neurobiology of love. Jennifer's wisdom, quick wit, and down-to-earth style helps parents navigate modern-day parenting problems, offering real-life examples as well as practical and effective tools and strategies. Her highly entertaining, inspiring presentations and workshops are shared with warmth and humor, making her a crowd-pleasing speaker with schools, medical professionals, corporations, and agencies throughout North America, Europe, and Asia. Welcome, Jennifer. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Jennifer, I first met you at a parenting conference back in 2012, and I loved your presentation. I connected with everything you were saying. I immediately bought your book. And you can see it's a very well-loved book, full of sticky notes.
I love it. That's
so
awesome.
As I read, I had my pencil in hand and I took notes so that I could have discussions with my husband easily. I even typed up the Coles Notes version for him, so because I knew he wouldn't read the book. Being busy parents, right? So I gave him the Coles Notes version, and
that's amazing.
I knew that connected parenting would change our lives, because parenting with connection and compassion and empathy, like that's the way to do it. So
it's magic. It's medicine.
It is. It's magical. Like the calm technique is truly magical. And I've seen it work time and time again with my own kids, nieces, nephews, my students.
Yeah, it is a superpower. It really is.
So can you explain to parents in the audience what the calm technique is? And parents, please take notes, because you are not going to want to miss a thing.
Okay, absolutely. So basically the calm technique is a version of mirroring. And mirroring is a technique. A lot of people, when you say mirroring, they're like, oh, I do that. I know how to do that. And you know, there's different versions of it. This type of mirroring is very, very specific. It's very empathy based. It's very affect based. It's about suspending your agenda, and it's not using any observational statements. So we've all kind of learned active listening or effective listening, where it sounds like, I understand, and you must feel really upset about that, and I understand you don't want to put your soccer uniform on, and you can kind of hear where it's going. So a lot of people think that's mirroring, and it's certainly not a bad technique, but it's not going to have the same kind of magic that we're talking about. So the calm technique is really using your soul, your heart, to deeply connect and listen to that person, whoever it is. Because, by the way, this doesn't just work for kids. This is like husbands, wives, bosses, nasty neighbors, mother-in-laws. It really is an incredibly important communication tool. So when you use this technique, you de-escalate people, you release incredible reward chemicals in the brain that soothe people, calm them down, and build resilience from the inside out. So that's kind of the Coles Notes version, I guess. Oh, I've lost you. I can't hear you.
There. Mirroring is so important. And so here's a situation from an adult's perspective. If I come home from work and I've had a really rough day and I talk to my husband, I don't want my husband to fix my problem. I don't want him to tell me what I should do next time. I want him to be my best friend in that moment. I want him to validate my feelings. I want him to say, no way, that's so horrible. I can't believe that happened. Like, I want him to feel what I'm feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's true for your children, but it's true for all of us. What happens when someone is upset is the other person naturally feels like, oh, I have to solve this problem, or I have to make them feel better, or I have to do something, or I have to teach them something, or I have to leave them with something. But so often, even our kids, they just want to vent. They just want to talk about their pain. They just want someone to be on the same channel that they're on. And after they calm down, they will tell you when it's time. They'll say, can you help me? What would you do? What did you do when you were a kid? How was your day? Like, you'll see them switch it. But when it's our agenda, I need to fix you, it's not going to work. And you're absolutely right. So if you came home from work, and I don't know, I use this example a lot, but let's say you had a really nasty neighbor, okay? And the nasty neighbor looks out her window and doesn't like when your garbage is on her driveway, or your car is a little bit over the driveway or whatever. She comes running out and she's screaming at you, and you get in the whole thing, and you come inside and you're like, that woman is crazy. And I had the worst day, and you won't believe what this woman did now. And if our spouse says, well, honey, like, why don't you've had this fight with her before. Why don't you just make sure the car's on the right side of the driveway? How would that go? Not well, right? It would be like, you don't get me, you don't understand. And when we try to do that with our children, those are the words we get back. You don't understand. You never listen to me. You don't care what I think. And so really it's this ability to just listen. And it's funny that you called it best friend, because I call it the best friend response, right? So if someone just says, what does she do? Look out her window waiting to see if your car is like an inch over in the driveway? Does she not have anything better to do? That moment of connection where you just go, oh, thank you, you get me, actually does some amazing things. So let's talk about the science of what happens, and then we can break it down, and I can actually teach people this technique. So when someone deeply listens, and I had years ago a little kid who said to me, because I often work with the child and the parents, and the child knew that I was working with the parents, and I said, how have the parents been doing? They've been working with me. Like, what do you think? How do you think they're doing? He goes, well, I think they've been listening to me with their heart. And that is a perfect explanation, right? That's exactly how it feels. So it's really being able to deeply connect. And when that happens, some pretty amazing things happen in the brain. So oxytocin, endorphins, natural endorphins, which are reward chemicals, actually flood the brain. Endorphins, right? All of these beautiful reward chemicals flood the brain, flooding every cell in the body and actually de-escalating and calming the person down. And as that happens, you're taking them from fight or flight, which is screaming and yelling and getting mad, and you don't understand me, and you're mean, and you're the worst mother ever. You're taking them from that state into an oxytocin-based state, and I'll explain what oxytocin is in a moment, which is a much calmer state, which actually leaves the frontal lobe on. So we've got to talk about the brain for a second here. So frontal lobe, that's the organizer, that's the inhibitor in the brain. That's the part of the brain that decides, is this a good idea? That's all the executive functioning. Is this a good idea? Maybe I hurt that person's feelings. I'd love to do this, but I'm not going to. It's the part of the brain that moves you in and out of time. It's the part of the brain that motivates you, takes perspective. Maybe that person has a completely different idea or perspective on this than I do. And that's all very sophisticated. And by the way, it takes 25 years to grow that part of the brain completely. And then you've got the midbrain. That part just cares about life or death and danger. That's it. It's the security system in the brain. It's not intelligent, that part of the brain. All of your intelligence is in the frontal lobe and the prefrontal cortex. So the midbrain just cares about, is it dangerous? I need it now. It's all about security. It sees, I don't know, if your child is in the store and wants a pair of running shoes that they've wanted, and you're saying no, and they're tensing up and they start breathing and they start to have all of the physiological functions of going into fight or flight. They no longer see the shoes they want. Sometimes I think ADHD kids in particular don't even know what they want at that point. They've just locked on, and they start to panic. And the brain tells them the only thing that will save you is those shoes. That's the only thing that's going to save you. So it might as well be a saber-tooth tiger. It becomes that intense. So the job of the frontal lobe is to mediate that, to mitigate that, and to literally push down on the midbrain. So few things we need to know. We're not actually parents. We're actually substitute frontal lobes. That's what we are. Yeah. So our job.
I tell my kids that it's my job to be their prefrontal cortex until they're 25, which drives them bonkers.
Well, certainly until they have a functioning one, which was, you know, certainly by then it's built. But probably 19, they need our help to be the substitute, that sort of that substitute frontal lobe for them. So that answers the question. Like, parents often say to me, why do I have to tell them to move 50,000 times? How come they've had a timeout this many times for that? How come I have to tell them every morning to do it? Because you're providing a substitute brain function. Your own brain has to do that for you every day, and your brain has to do it for them every day. Now, the tricky part is their midbrain is very powerful, especially if you have ADHD. They have big, big emotions, big, big feelings. We'll come back to that. We'll loop back to that. So their brain's job, the midbrain's job is to push back. No, you're mean. I need it. You have to give it to me. You're the worst mother, and freak out and get mad. And then the brain kind of goes offline. The frontal lobe goes offline, and they're in full fight or flight mode. It is harder to be a frontal lobe for a child with ADHD because children with ADHD have trouble with executive functioning. So that part of their brain, not all the electricity that they need is getting to that frontal lobe sometimes. So they have trouble with impulse control and inhibition and, you know, I don't know, filtering out irrelevant behaviors, which is why they hoot and sing and make noises and drive their other siblings crazy. But they're also joyous and funny and creative, and they're visionaries, and they're, I don't know, they're amazing. And they're constantly in a world which is telling them to be quiet, sit down, cut it out, behave like everyone else. And so many children in my office say to me, I feel like throw me in the garbage. Like, I just feel like I'm flawed. I feel like there's nothing good about me, because they are so constantly being squished and told to be quiet and told to sit down. All three of my kids have ADHD, by the way.
Oh, I didn't know
All
that.
of them. Yeah, all of them. They're much older now. My son's 28, well, turning 28. My daughter's 25, and my youngest is turning 18 in January. So, and they're all doing amazing. But part of it is supporting them and loving them and understanding how their brain works, and helping to celebrate that amazing, fast moving brain, instead of having them think it's this flaw, this thing that is wrong with them. It's a gift. You just have to know how to control it. That's really it.
That's so key. That's so important to really celebrate and help them see their strengths.
Yeah, because they so often don't. And really, there are, I mean, you know this probably, there's the list of successful, amazing, visionary people who have changed the world with ADHD is very long, because they're not afraid to bust outside of the box or say, what box? Right?
Exactly.
And they're the people that actually bust down the paradigms and actually create change, if they can get out of their own way. If they turn in on themselves and end up having self-esteem issues and getting into a lot of trouble and not finding a way to kind of, I call it having a Ferrari brain, right? And it's great to have a Ferrari. It's fantastic. It's a great car. But if you don't know how to drive it, you're going to go in the ditch. And then the boring minivans are going to go right past you and wave, right? And you're like, but I have a Ferrari and I'm in the ditch. So it's when I work with kids, I talk about driving lessons for their brain, and learning how to develop emotional resilience and regulation, which you can. They will always have difficulty with it to some degree, but there's a million tools, brain hacks that we can even talk about today that can help them keep that car on the road and then pass everybody.
I love that analogy. That's the analogy I used to explain ADHD to my oldest son when he was diagnosed. He was really little, and he thought it was so cool that he has this cool sports car brain. And then when we talked about it more, we talked about Dr. Hallowell says, but the brakes are bicycle brakes.
Yes.
So putting on the brakes required for self-control, self-regulation, emotional control. That's the tricky piece.
Yeah. And there are complex things to help and support and treat ADHD. But one of the biggest things that I think we're starting to really understand is that we are the programmers of our own brain. We, as parents, we're the programmers of our children's brain, which is, we want to touch on that in our conversation today. But these are programs. So if a child believes I can't control myself, I have no impulse control, I can't do it, I'll never be able to do it, then they won't be able to do it. But if we raise them to say, it's harder for you, it's actually a lot harder for you, but it is not impossible for you. And we can rewire your brain. You can learn to rewire your brain. You can be the architect and the engineer of your own brain. And then that's empowering for them, right? And then also balancing that with the gifts of ADHD. So let's come back to the brain, because that's how we started. This is how my brain goes. It goes all over the place. So we were talking about mirroring, and we were talking about how important this is. So now the good news is that most of us know how to mirror pretty well with babies. Like nobody would pick up a baby that's crying and go, "Oh, you're fine. Everything's okay." Like nobody would do that with a baby. You'd pick up the baby and you go, "Oh my goodness, look at you." And we'd actually mirror them. We would match them. That neurological match releases the endorphins, opiates, natural opiates, and oxytocin, which are all reward chemicals, which we're going to come back to because this is very, very important and key. That calm the baby down. So the baby's like, well, this place is weird. Something's going on in my diaper. I don't know what that noise is, but this person keeps showing up. She seems to get me. So I'm going to be okay. And so as mom and dad and caregiver show up, mirror and match the responses back to the baby starts to figure out, okay, all right, I'm going to be okay. I get calmed down. This person understands me. I'm safe. And now I can go and explore my world. So children that have ADHD were also babies that had ADHD, right? So as they're in their cribs and they're looking around, they're seeing your face, but they're also seeing what's behind your face. And they're also looking over here, and they're also aware of something that's going on in their sock, or they're intensely bombarded by data. And the brain's ability to kind of filter that out. People think it's a problem. It's such a badly named disorder, honestly. It's not that they don't pay attention. It's they pay attention to everything all the time, and everything's really interesting. And when they finally lock on and something is awesome, then they're in complete flow. They step completely out of time, and literally the house could be burning down and they're still working on that Lego, right? There's an incredible lock-on ability with the ADHD brain. So, okay, here's my ADHD brain. What was I just saying right before that? I was just saying something. I was going somewhere.
Mirroring with babies.
Mirroring. Okay. And that ADHD kids were babies. So as we're making those facial expressions and we're echoing back the appropriate response, they're missing some of that because they're looking everywhere, right? So it's really important with ADHD kids to be constantly making sure as much as possible that you are doing it now, because that helps to repair what got missed when they were little, and not because it was your fault. It's because who knows that a baby's ADHD? Nobody, right? So data and information is coming into the ADHD brain differently. And the other thing, which I'm sure you're talking about in this, is ADHD is really an emotional disorder. It's like emotions they're like tsunamis, like not getting that thing or changing a plan, or you said we could do this and now we're doing this, can be devastating. They feel it like it's overwhelming, that every cell in their body is reacting to this thing. Then the fight or flight mechanism trips on. Now they're in real fight or flight. Interesting thing sometimes about ADHD kids, though, is they have this big giant explosion. And then literally 20 minutes later, they're like, what? You're a dish rag on the floor. You're a mess. Because they've moved on. They're already on to something else, right? So we'll talk and we'll weave through how important it is as a parent of an ADHD child to learn how their brain works, to learn how not to take everything they do and say so personally, to be a good frontal lobe, even though they're not easy to be frontal lobes for. They need you to be a good frontal lobe. Otherwise, their anxiety goes through the roof. They don't make it easy, but they need it. Okay, so ADHD babies. So most of us are good at this. That's good news. So here's the thing we have to understand. We naturally talk to babies like this, but when our children start to acquire language, that's when we start to drop it. So the example I always give, because I can't think of a better one, is let's say you have a little baby, they're in the bath, they're fussing. Nobody says to the baby, "You're 4.5 months old. You've had a bath every single night. I don't know why you're crying." No one does that to a baby. To a baby, you would say, "Oh my goodness, look at you. You're cold. You're having a hard time." The baby doesn't know what you're saying, but the baby sees on your face a perfect representation of what they are feeling inside. which calms them down, releasing oxytocin, natural opiates, and endorphins. Now, oxytocin, which I need to speak about for a moment, is probably the most powerful of these reward chemicals. What happens when oxytocin releases is it switches the brain from fight or flight back into a thinking, cognitive brain. So you come back into time. It blocks cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. So oxytocin blocks cortisol. It actually inhibits cortisol, which is amazing. It strengthens your immune system. So in the world we're living in right now, I can't think of anything more important than having your immune system be upgraded, which is what happens when oxytocin flows. It speeds up neuroplasticity. So it actually makes your kids smarter and learn better and remember things better, which is incredibly important as they learn and grow and try to master what's going on in school. It's exhausting for an ADHD brain to be sitting in school. We can come back to that as well. So those are just the benefits. Now, the other thing that I think is really important about oxytocin is it's free. You don't need a prescription and you don't run out. So, and you have it at your fingertips all the time. So as simple as deeply listening, deeply understanding, soothing, and getting your child will start to release oxytocin. So what do we do when our child acquires language? Well, what does it look like? So now you have a 4-year-old. 4-year-old is screaming and yelling because they don't want to get out of the bath. Now, what does it look like? Honey, get out of the bath, please. Mommy's getting very angry. Daddy's getting very upset. I want you out of this bath. You know, your brother, he's already in his pajamas. Come on, 1, 2, 3, 3.5, right? We start yelling. And for ADHD children, and for many of us who have ADHD children with ADHD ourselves, transitions are really hard. Changing states is very difficult. The cingulate system in the brain, which is the gear switch that switches you from one activity to another, which switches focus from one thing to the next, is sticky when you have ADHD, and they don't like to change states. And that's a big state change, a bath. You're warm, you're happy, you're cuddly in the warm water, and you got to get out, and it's cold, and then you got to go to bed, and then you're going to get yelled at the whole time you're getting ready for bed. So I just want to stay in this bath, right? So that transition is hard. So we usually end up getting really angry. But what you want to actually do is you want to step into their world. So windows are actually incredibly important with ADHD kids. Never expect an ADHD kid to do something the second you ask. Don't expect any kid to. Kids in general are out of time, right? They're living outside of time. They're in the moment. They're in the now. So you give yourself a 10 or 15 minute window to get your kid out of the bath. Don't think, oh, it's 8 o'clock, they got to get out. That's not going to happen. And you're going to get disappointed, and you're going to get angry, and it's going to stress you out, and you're tired at the end of the day. So that's a recipe for what it looks like in a lot of people's houses late at night, right? So in that moment, you tell yourself, this is a 10 to 15 minute process, getting my kid out of bed. You look at the clock, it's 7:45. You're like, okay, I got 15 minutes. Then you go in, you sit on the ground, you put your hand in the bath, and you're like, oh, you know what? Now I get why you don't want to get out of this bath. Like the perfect temperature right now. And you got all these toys, and what are you doing? And what are you playing with? And what's happening? Oh, this is a waterfall, and this is this. Get in there a little bit, right? Then what you're doing while you do that is you're getting oxytocin flowing, which blocks the cortisol, brings the frontal lobe back online. This is medicine, right? Calming the child down enough. So now you have this lovely connection. And now what's going to increase is compliance. I'm not going to tell you they're going to jump out of the bath, although they do often, but it's going to be much easier to get them out of the bath. So now you say, you know what? I get that you love this so much. I'm going to give you another 5 minutes. You enjoy yourself. ADHD kids need some kind of external measure of time. So that's either you or one of those fancy clocks that changed from red to green, whatever. Or timers sometimes work, but a lot of ADHD kids have anxiety, so timers will often freak them out. You can flick the lights, you can have a song come on the iPad. There's lots of different ways that you can kind of transition that. Then you come back in and you say, oh, it's so hard. That 5 minutes went really fast. That didn't even feel like 5 minutes, and now you switch to a message of competence. But here's the problem. We have to get out of your bath because you want to have time for stories or whatever it is. And now you switch to, I believe in you. Oh no, you can do this. Let's see if we can get this Ferrari to do what we need it to do. And I know you can do this. And then actually step away a little bit if they're young enough. If they're young, stay with them in the bath. I'm not telling you to leave your kid in the bath, but if they're old enough that you can go in and out, remove yourself for a second, because hovering over them will make them lock down. Tell them you believe in them and you're really excited to see that. You absolutely bet that they'll be out of there in like the next couple of minutes. And most of the time they will. Sometimes they won't, and we can talk about that. But the more you do this with your kids, there's flow, there's love happening, there's compliance happening, there's connection happening, which is something they so often don't get. These kids, they're so often just told to stop it, sit down, get it out. What are you doing? Why would you say that? Right? So the more you can have these lovely moments with them, that's medicine for them. So not only does it get them out of the bath, but more and more moments like this build resilience in the brain, build neural pathways, help the cingulate system, help the whole brain actually start to move and click the way that it needs to click, instead of associating every transition with panic and fighting. Because what ends up happening is not only are they already having a difficult time with transition, but transitions plus getting yelled at, which is most of the time for them, or at least sharply spoken to, they're now associating any change with that. The midbrain goes, oh, change means fighting. I don't want to fight, which is cognitively, you want to say, what are you doing? Like every night we have a fight about you not getting out of the bath. How can you not get out of the bath? Why wouldn't you want to just avoid that? But the midbrain is not the part of the brain that does that thinking. The frontal lobe does that thinking, and that's offline as soon as the child starts to associate something with angst, something with fighting, something with screaming. Think homework while I'm saying this, bedtime while I'm saying this, all of these big transitions in the day. The other thing that's important is you're getting all those benefits. I forgot to mention that. When you do this, your brain gets the cortisol block. Your brain gets the oxytocin and the opiates and the endorphins. Your brain gets all those same amazing benefits too. So your own brain is being medicated. So as you work together in flow, everybody gets healthier and happier, and everybody comes into kind of emotional coherence in the family. Now, can already hear what people are saying. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. I don't have to. So the truth is, and this is what I say to everybody, you don't have time not to.
Absolutely. You actually save time. You save time. Can I share an example?
Yes, please.
So my niece is brilliant. She'll be 3 next month. So she's a toddler. But her language is so well developed and her reasoning is amazing. She's I love spending time with her. Anyway, one day we were outside painting, and it was a really cool painting activity where you drop the paint in the water and then you put the paper on top, and the paper lifts the paint out of the water, and she was totally enjoying herself. Well, I knew the rain was coming and dinner was coming, so we would be transitioning. So I gave her the transition warnings. I said, and time isn't going to mean anything to her. So I laid out 3 pieces of paper and let her know we've got 3 paintings left. Now we have 2 paintings left. Now we have 1 painting left. And, when there's 1 left, then you're going to have to help me put the paints away. So she was okay with that. And she helped put the lids on, and she was really so careful with it. And then it started to rain. So we went in the house and we brought our paintings with us and laid them on the table and put the paint box on the table. And then she got upset because she didn't want to stop painting. She wanted to keep on painting. And when she gets upset, she does her temper tantrum on the floor. But she laid down, she looked me right in the eye, and I could just see she's thinking, okay, like, this is your last chance to give me what I want before I start kicking and screaming. So of course I wanted to say, because she's smart and she has the language and she's so good at reasoning when she's in the state to reason. I wanted to say to her, like, get up off the floor. You're not going to have a temper tantrum right now. It's time for dinner. I already gave you the transition warnings. Like, that's the instinct. But I thought, no, I'm going to take a deep breath and calm myself down first. And then I got on the floor with her, and I was right at her level, and I said, painting was so much fun. It was so cool how the paint went in the water and you swirled it around with the stick. So I was trying to imagine what she was thinking about painting.
Yeah, that is master mirroring right there. That's it.
I've been practicing. And I said, I noticed that you really love the pink and the purple and the yellow paints and how they swirled together. And she sat up. So she was no longer laying. She sat up and she said, yeah, and the orange and green paints. I said, oh, yes. And it was so nice how you lifted the paper so gently out of the water. It was such a nice activity. And then I noticed how you put all the lids on the paint to help clean up. You did such a lovely job. And then I went on to say, and I know it's really hard to stop doing things that are fun for us. And she just listened. She was really listening, but I could see her face just changing.
It changes everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
It
It was
changes.
magic.
It is. It's magic. Now it's hard, right? Like that. Parents will often think, well, that takes more time. You're right. It doesn't take more time. It takes less because now they get up and they actually do it,
Yes.
right?
And she did.
Um,
We had a little
yeah,
hug. We talked about painting
yeah,
another day, and that was it. Tantrum
that was
avoided.
it.
If she went into
That,
the tantrum, that could take a
yeah.
long time.
Yes. Oh God, it can take a very long time. So that was literally perfect. It doesn't always go like that, but honestly, about 95% of the time it does. Truly, it does, especially if you're mirroring, not active listening. Because if you'd said, I know you really liked painting and you had a really fun time, but you can hear by the lilt in my voice, the sing song. Of course I'm going to say, but too bad, it's time to go. So she's already going to react to that before I've even said it, right? And what you did there, which was so lovely, I actually felt calm. I could feel the oxytocin flowing while you were telling the story, right? It just takes you into this beautiful, coherent moment where everything is paused and you're just joining around what a beautiful activity that was and how hard it is sometimes to leave an activity that's that much fun. And it's literally like medicine. So what's happens, she gets calmed down. So then when it's time to go, she just goes. And the really neat part, and we didn't get to this part, so you probably did do this, but when they actually do clean up, don't have a parade. Don't say, oh, that was so good. Look how you cleaned up and you didn't, like, don't make such a big deal. When they do it, keep that nice ease, that nice, beautiful neutrality where you're like, nice cleaning up. That was pretty good. Well done. Because if you have too much energy, then they figure out, oh, not cleaning up can really make my aunt happy or really make my aunt mad, right? And they start to figure out where they can play around with this energy with us as parents. So that I'm very impressed. That was a beautiful, beautiful mirroring moment. That was lovely. And here's the thing, like those moments, that's just the bonus. Okay, that's the bonus. You had a lovely moment. It went well. You cleaned up. It was all good. But as a parent or an aunt, the more that you do that, the more you are building a brain that can handle moving, that can handle transitions. You've got self-esteem. You've got a sense of self. You didn't get yelled at. There was no shame. That is an amazing brain builder. So over time, and there's a lot of evidence that's showing, and mindfulness is wonderful and all those things are fantastic. But one of the things that's showing that really makes a difference with emotional regulation is connection. Connection. And connection is also one of the most powerful things to fight addiction. So those reward chemicals that a baby gets from a parent, where you're like, oh my goodness, look at you. Those are the most powerful chemicals in the world. And if those start to break down, if those connections start to break down, and if they break down too much, and by the way, this also has to do with temperament and the brain and all kinds of things, but eventually kids start looking for those reward chemicals somewhere else. And teenagers start looking for those chemicals somewhere else. And where they're looking is video games and drugs and dangerous behaviors. And really, you want them to have as much of those organic, pure reward chemicals as possible, so they don't go searching for reward chemicals somewhere else, right? So beautiful.
As you were saying that, I was just thinking about my teenager. I have a new teenager. He's 13. And kids with ADHD are more prone to become addicted to things.
Yep.
And using the calm technique, as the kids get older, I've noticed that in my family, we've forgotten about it because the kids have good language and because we can reason with them, and we just expect them to listen to what we're saying. So actually, that's why I pulled your book out again. And discovered your course online, Connected Parenting, the teen one. That's the one I'm taking right now. So
you got to brush off, you got to dust off those skills. And that's so interesting what you just said, because the more you make this, because it's not really a strategy, it's a philosophy, it's a way of being, it's a way of living. And you don't just talk to your kids this way. You talk to the nasty person at Starbucks, and before you know it, she's smiling and apologizing. Like it's the most incredible way to reduce conflict in your life and just have this flow in all of the relationships in your life. And it gives you this confidence to handle conflict so that you can just de-escalate things beautifully and then like who you are while you do it. And so when you raise your kids this way, there's a flow, and you're right, you don't have to use it that much. So the more you use it, the less you have to use it, which is interesting. but you do have to dust it off for the teenagers usually.
I have
Right about
a tween as well. And
that.
I've noticed I do more active listening. Like, so for example, when he was frustrated the other day with his gaming headset, and I said, "Oh, I can see that you're so frustrated." But he gets so annoyed with me when I say, "I can see that you're feeling
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah."
And-
He
yes.
hates that.
And that's because it's observatory, right? And we would hate that. So let's say I probably gave this example already, but in other talks, but it's a good one. I call that the customer service response, right? So if you, I don't know, if there was some big disaster and you needed the company on the phone to fix something really quickly, and they were like, "I understand, ma'am, that must be, I can see that you're really frustrated by that." It actually makes you angry and makes your blood boil. So when you point out the observation, when it has that lilt, first of all, and when you're saying, "I can see that you're really angry," they get furious, right? So the key thing, we'll actually break down the calm technique. We'll do that in a second into the 4 steps, but you can't have the observation. And if you do have the observational statement, it's got to have so much affect to balance it out. But it's usually inflammatory to say, "I can see that, you sound like, it seems like, I'm hearing that." It just makes someone to go, "Stop it. Stop saying
Yes,
that."
it's
Like,
exactly what he does. So I caught myself and I was like, "Okay, let me try again." And
yeah.
then I tried to get my tone and my face to match his frustration. And I said, "Oh, it's so frustrating because you were really hoping that your headset would light up and it's not lighting up. And that's so annoying."
Yeah.
And then he was like, "Yeah." And then he talked about it.
Yeah, there's a very big difference to the brain. What happens in the first technique, when there's nothing wrong with that technique, it's fine. It just won't have the impact that we're talking about. The first way, when it's active listening, it has to go through the language center of the brain. It has to get organized, and then hits the limbic system, right? And by then they're mad. But with mirroring, with the calm technique, which we'll break down now, you're joining, you're with them. Those beautiful chemicals are flowing, and they calm down just like that. It hits the limbic system, or the midbrain, the part of the brain that's, the security system, directly and instantly. And that's where you get that hit where it's just like, oh, and both of you can feel it. When you get it right, like you did with your niece, you feel it right in your heart, right? And I don't know how familiar people are with heart math or brain heart coherence, but when you have a conversation like this, your heart actually starts to beat together. And your heart and your brain start to sync up, right? So what's really interesting is when we yell and we get mad, we feel really frustrated and we feel really angry. Those what we call negative emotions are really just our GPS system telling us we're off the road. We're not being who we want to be in that moment. We think we're mad at our kid in that moment, but we're actually mad at ourselves for losing it and getting upset, right? Those emotions are actually there as our own GPS system. So when you have a moment like you did with your niece, you had no resistance, right? There was a flow. It felt right. You didn't feel guilty. You didn't feel bad. You didn't feel like you didn't like your own parents, your parenting in that moment. It's all done by feeling. And at the same time, you're teaching this to your kids. So you have teenagers coming up or you have one now, but as you raise your kids this way, I was just talking to my own kids about this the other day. And they actually work with me at Connected Parenting now, but they just mirror so naturally to other people. And I never taught them how to do that. I raised them that way. So it never had to be transferred. It got picked up intuitively and naturally. And now that's just how they talk to people, which is so neat. You don't have to teach your kids. They'll learn it from you. We're always teaching them. Right? Okay, so let's break down the calm technique. And I'm still impressed by that mirroring moment with your niece. That was just perfect. And so let's use that and let's break down what you did. Okay. So the first thing was that you connected. You connected with her. You didn't force your agenda, which was, please, we got to go. And in life, you have to do hard things when you do good things. And like, that's where we all go, right? You didn't do that. You connected with her. You actually connected to the point where you got down on her level and looked in her eyes, right? And she had this little moment and you slowed everything down, right? So that's the first thing you did. You took your agenda, which is, we got to get out of here. I got to go. We got to eat. There's traffic. But you just put it aside. You get to bring it back. You get to bring it back because you are a frontal lobe, but not necessarily in that moment. And then if we take down the next, so the A is the affect matching. right? C is connect, A is affect matching, L is the listening part. So you listened to her all through the activity. You watched her with the swirling colors. You watched her, you put different colors together that she really liked. And you brought that back to her so beautifully, especially when you put the green and the blue or whatever you said to her, which shows her that, wow, my auntie was listening to me. She was watching me. She really saw me, which is such a gift to children, right? And in that moment, you can summarize, which is kind of what you did. You did this painting and you did that painting, and you used this color and you used that color. And it was so much fun. So you kind of summarize the whole thing. You can clarify, what was your favorite painting? Or if a child is upset, what was the moment that made you so mad? Like what happened when you were building that Lego tower that really made you so mad? That's clarifying. That actually works really well with highly sensitive kids. That might work really well in your son, actually, because you're not picking an emotional detail. You're picking a more pragmatic, practical detail, but you're listening and you're there and you're present. You can paraphrase. If she says, I don't want to clean up, I just had the best time ever, you can say, right? You just had the best time. Of course you don't want to clean up. I pretty much said exactly the same thing. I just put a little spin on it, right? So there's clarifying, summarizing. Wait, I've never had to do that before until you said it today. Now I've had to do it a bunch of times. What did I just say? Clara, help me.
Okay, clarifying, summarizing.
Paraphrasing, I already did. Oh, wondering out loud. Okay, all right. So
yeah, that's a good one.
I'm just, don't worry about the editing. My brain goes all over the place. It works a million miles an hour. But okay, so the fourth thing you're going to do is wondering out loud. So if we use the example of your niece, maybe she'd had a really hard day. Maybe a couple things didn't go wrong that day and she was having an extra hard time leaving the painting. So you would do all of the things you just did, but then you would also say, but you know what? I wonder if it also had to do with the fact that you really wanted to play in the sandbox and that little girl wouldn't let you. Or you thought today you were going to grandma's and you weren't. Like if you know there's some other thing, then you can link it back. And then you're also helping her understand, oh yeah, I guess that does add to why I'm feeling that way. And that there's a lot of teaching in that. There's a lot of really beautiful guidance in helping children understand how to weave things together. Sometimes, especially boys have a really hard time. They will often feel emotions in their body physiologically and have no idea it's anxiety, or have no idea it's because they didn't get invited to that birthday party that, yesterday, but they're still feeling it in their bodies today. So that's a really important technique for that. And then when you've done all those things, that's the M. That's the mirroring. And then you just keep practicing, because it is like, you've been doing this a long time, right? It is very counterintuitive. It sounds easy, but you get into it and you're like, what am I supposed to say? Right? It can get really tricky. So I would say practice it with everybody, anyone and everyone, all the people in your life. I would also focus on practicing it with your kids when they're happy, when they're excited about something, when they just drew a picture, instead of saying, oh, that's a really nice picture, let's put it on the fridge. You go, whoa, I like the way you got the sun shining off that sword. And you kind of get into the emotion and the energy that they put into that painting. And that will also release oxytocin and all of those beautiful reward chemicals. So I want you to kind of think of these little drops of medicine that you're kind of putting out there all day long.
I really like that idea about practicing this calm technique in the happy moments. That's something my husband and I have just started to really focus on, because kids with ADHD, you could easily write a big long list of all the things that don't go well with them. And then if you're focusing on that, then that's all you're seeing and noticing and commenting on. So we're making an effort right now to really notice, and we're just one thing. We're each making one observation every single day, a detailed observation of something that they did that was really wonderful, and we're writing it down in their I Like book. So we each write an observation, and then at the end of the day before bed, one of us reads the comments that we both wrote, and we just share with how impressed we are with whatever little, I noticed that you had a lot of patience today, and it wasn't easy because you really wanted me to do something, and I wasn't at home, I was driving, so you had to wait for me to get home. And then when I walked in the door, I even said to you, please wait, because I need to go to the bathroom, I need to put my purse down, I need to hurry up and put dinner on, and then I'll help you. Like, that took a lot of patience, and I really noticed that you managed that.
That's amazing. And that is so important. And I talk about the accomplishment book, which is the same thing, where you're just sort of writing these little moments. Nothing bad goes in there, only good moments, and detail is perfect. And reading it at bed is perfect. Because and often they want you to read it again, like go back to the beginning and read everything from the beginning. But what that really does is it retells their story. Because their story is often, I get in trouble all the time, I ruin things all the time, I'm the one everybody's mad at all the time. And when you start writing that the I like book or the accomplishment book, they start to see a different side. And the other thing that happens is so do we, right? Because we're always looking for, oh, there he goes again. Well, of course, we do that all the time, right? So if we actually set our brain, it's actually a part of the brain called the reticular activation system, to look for the good things, to look for the things that are going right, which by the way are happening all day long. It's just if we don't tag them, it's just like Google. If you don't tag them, you don't see them. They don't show up in your algorithm, right? So
if I'm tagging my kids never listen to me, then that's what I'm going to notice. I'm going to notice all the times that they never listen to me. But if I change it to, I'm going to notice a time when he does listen to me.
Yeah. It changes everything. It changes the story. It changes the narrative, right? And kids do this all the time. They're like, you never get my sister in trouble. It's only me that gets in trouble. And that's because they've tagged it. There might have been 5 times that day their sister got in trouble, but they didn't see it. It did not get pulled into that neural net. It did not get pulled into their awareness, especially in a busy ADHD brain. So you can have your kid tag that. You can say, you know what? I'm going to start watching for that. I'm going to start noticing if your sister gets in trouble at all. And hey, you know what? Why don't you watch for that too? See if you can notice how many times today your sister gets in trouble. Let's see what happens. Now you've done it for both of you. Right? Which is really interesting. And this is all part of brain building. This is all part of the engineering of the brain, because we all live by programs. Really, these are all just programs in our brain. And guess what? You can rewrite the program. You can't delete programs, but they can go offline. You can stop using them and you can rewrite and you can overwrite.
And the interesting thing about the programming is that by the age of 12, kids with ADHD receive 20,000 more negative comments than the neurotypical peers at the age of 12. 20,000.
Yes.
Yeah, at least. Imagine what that is doing to their story about themselves, to their self-esteem. Like, and it's the adults. I hate to say it, it's the parents, it's the teachers. Like, we're doing this to them.
Yep. And what happens, and this is where it's such a complicated cycle, right? The more they believe that about themselves, the more they stop trying. Right. So when I work with kids one-on-one, with especially my ADHD kids, let's say they have a teacher that they get in trouble with all the time. So I have this thing called parent management and teacher management. So we work together to figure out how to manage the teacher, right? And not in a disrespectful way, in a lovely way. And what I say to the kid is, okay, so who's the loudest in the class? Who gets in trouble the most? And it's usually that. Sometimes it's another kid. And I say, okay, all right. And who's the second person that gets in trouble? And who's the third person that gets in trouble? And then I say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Your job is to fly under the radar. Okay. Because every time one of those kids says something, it hits the teacher's radar blip. And she's like, oh, there he goes again. Right. What happens to ADHD kids all the time is other kids make noise or say something, and the teacher locks on and gets in trouble and gets the ADHD kid in trouble, who often is doing it, but sometimes is not doing it. Sometimes they were minding their own business and they still got in trouble because that kid is on the teacher's radar all the time. So we talk about that. And then we talk about, okay, so for a week or for 2 weeks, you're going to drop under the third loudest kid. Constantly use that kid and try to drop under, and they can do it. They can do it. And they drop under it. And what happens is they fall off the teacher's radar. And now the second loudest kid is getting into trouble, right? And they can sort of learn without being blamed, without feeling yucky, without feeling negative, without feeling bad, that, oh, I actually can control my environment. I do actually have some power here in a good way. They figured out their power in a bad way a long time ago, right? And they don't have a lot of power. So that's the only power they can use a lot of the time. But once you start helping them see without blame, and because it usually comes out, if you were just nice to people, if you just try to, that's delivered in exactly the way you don't want your child to behave. So why would they listen to you, right? But if you teach it in a way like I just talked about, and they start to realize, oh, I really can. I really do have an impact on how people see me and how people talk to me and how what people think about me. And ADHD kids are often really helpful. They're so helpful. They love to help. They love to problem solve. They're excited and exuberant. It just makes my heart so sad that they're just squashed all the time. They just want to, they're joyous, right? And sometimes it's obnoxious. Sometimes it's a bit much. And they need to learn how to, work those breaks and take those turns a little differently. But they can. And the most important programming is us at home. It's us. It's the way we talk to them. And it is hard to raise an ADHD child, but they have such potential, such extraordinary potential. And it's our job to get them there. So the calm technique is really worth investing in. It is the best medicine you could ever give your child. And I love that you're kind of looking at it again from the teen point of view, because honestly, it's teen whispering. Whether your kid is ADHD or not, there is no other way to talk to a teenager. Like that is how, because all they care about is their sovereignty, their independence, right? Who they are and who they're becoming. And the more we try to control them, the more angry and defiant and distant from us they become, right?
So here's an example with a teenager. I did something that my son did not like. I don't even know what it was I said or did something he didn't like. And he
You're
told me,
probably embarrassing. We're very embarrassed.
Oh, I'm so embarrassing. I'm so embarrassing. So he told me, you're so annoying and just leave me alone. And he walked away and went to his bedroom and closed the door. So how can I connect with my teenage son when he's shutting me out? How do I let him know that I'm there for him? And
yep, that's a really good question. So there's a few ways. One, I want you to, and we've talked about this, and I know you do this, but remember that these techniques, the calm technique, all of that stuff is in all ways. You're not just using it when you've blown it or when your child just, got angry. When he comes out to get something out of the fridge and is like, where's the chocolate milk? Instead of saying, you drank it, and how about don't be so rude next time? You say, I know, right? I hate that too. When I want something and you think it's there and then it's not, and then walk away. Don't even stand there going, huh? Did you see that? Did you see how I connected with you? Don't do that. Just go, I know, right? And walk away. Have these little moments where they go, huh, wasn't expecting that. That felt a little different. That was good. That's how you're building up the connection. That's what gets them, that actually makes you less annoying. If you use that term, you're so annoying, which you'll hear a lot from your teenagers, especially teenage girls, actually. But you'll be able to use that as a marker. So when you're using all of this connection and you're really nurturing that connection, they'll say that less. Or they'll say, you're so cute, or, oh, mom, instead of like, you're annoying, right? There's going to be less of a bite to it. So remember to be using it most of the time. Texting, fantastic way to connect with your teen. They're on their phones anyway. That is their world. It's not going away. I mean, there's a lot of, I'm sure we could have a whole other podcast on how to deal with screens and ADHD kids who are, more addicted to things, which I want to make sure, I'm going to write the word adrenaline down because I want to talk about adrenaline in a second. Text them a little heart emoji from your annoying mom, I love you. Right? Or just send him something, like a little something, and he'll smile, or send him a picture of when he was a baby. When you want him to do something, it's so much easier to text your teenager, hey, I love you. I know you're busy. You got a ton of stuff on the go. I don't need you to do it right now, but by 6 o'clock, could you please take the garbage out? I know you can do it. I love you. Love, mom. Right? Actually, that's way too long. You got to shorten that into text bits. You can't send big, long text to teenagers. You have to send it in like little bits.
Especially when they have ADHD.
Especially when they have ADHD. But it's just in etiquette in the texting world, big, long texts are not a thing. Oh. If you notice, your kids will send they'll say the same thing, but they'll send it in 5 or 6 different texts. So it's just little lines. And also watch periods and capitals and exclamation marks, because they can all be rude. We think we're being cute.
Oh. But
it's actually rude, right? If you do K period, that's rude.
Oh.
That means like, okay, fine. That's what that means, right? So I have a whole podcast, I think I recorded, I don't know if I posted it yet, on that my daughter helped me with like texting with your teenager. But yeah, you use texting because then you don't have the facial expressions and the arguing and there's two really important things about teenagers. And with ADHD kids, this is just more intense. Teenagers, first of all, they feel the whole world. It doesn't go through their frontal lobe, whether they have ADHD or not. They've actually done really incredible studies where they've shown adults pictures of facial expressions and put them in an MRI machine and see what's going on in their brain and see how accurate they are. And they're pretty accurate. Then they put teenagers in the MRI machine and they show them facial expressions, and they see anger when there's no anger. They see judgment when there's no judgment. They see sadness when there's no sadness. They see shame when there's no shame. They really don't interpret those things particularly well. So when you're having a conversation with them and it flares up and you think, what did I do? What did I do? I wasn't yelling. What happened there? They have interpreted through the limbic part of their brain all kinds of emotion that wasn't even there to begin with. So you want to be actually much more neutral with your teenagers, and with not all kids with ADHD, but a lot of kids with ADHD have like rejection sensitivity, right? So you'll just say, honey, hang that up. And they hear, hang that up, you loser. That's not what you said, but they literally feel it that way. They literally do. I had a wonderful kid in my office a few years ago. I love this kid. And what he did is he'd recorded his father being horrible to him. And he came into my office and he put his phone down and he's all ready to show me this. And he hits play and we're listening. And I'm hearing him being horrible, like screaming at his dad. And I see his dad, I listen, it wasn't a video, it was just an audio. But his dad was actually being pretty neutral and pretty calm. Like I thought the dad was doing a really good job. And you could see the kid, he was like his face was just like, what? And he was absolutely, his face went white and he's like, this isn't what happened. Like he couldn't understand why what he was listening to was not because when they're calm, it's much better, right? And we had that helped us have a whole conversation about how he interprets things and that he gets extra sensitive when he's feeling threatened or embarrassed. If an ADHD kid gets embarrassed, it's a whole thing, right? They get this shame reflex and they'll lash out and just be so nasty. And usually will double or triple down on a sibling, and then they hear the message, why would you do that? That's so mean, but she did this and I needed to get revenge. And they get all angry. And the truth is they will often have a disproportionate response because of that rejection sensitivity. So knowing that happens, first of all, and that's why it's really important to be neutral. You have to be super neutral and you line up with love, not fear, right? When you're anger is fear. So when you're angry, they're going to hear your anger. It's going to get infused with their anger. And then it's cranked up about 100%, which is why it's going to slam the door and say you're annoying.
This is why it's so important that parents take care of themselves so that you're able to stay calm and neutral, because it's so easy to let our kids trigger us, and our ADHD kids seem to know which buttons to press, but we need to take care of ourselves so that we can approach all those situations calm and neutral.
Yep. And the really important thing is when you blow it, because I say when, because we all do, when you lose it and you are crying at night going, which happens all the time, I don't want to be that parent. I hate myself. Why did I do that? And then you promise yourself in the morning you're not going to do it. And then 10 minutes into the morning, it's like, get on. Like our kids can make us so crazy. It is so hard to parent. But remember, you can always repair. So the other way to use the calm technique is in repair. So they didn't get out of the bath and you lost it and you took a bunch of stuff away and you took their birthday party away and they told them they'll never have Halloween again and you went bonkers. You go back and you say, you know what? I had some time to think. That bath was so warm and you were so happy and I was all about my agenda and I didn't stop and think about how hard that transition was for you. And you have time to think about your sentence. You can really think about what you want to say. So you're actually not having to worry about your own emotions at the same time. And you can go back and you can repair, right? So repair mirroring is really important. The repair mirroring and the kind of chit chat everyday mirroring is actually the most important mirroring. The de-escalation mirroring is just magical. I mean, it's just amazing. If you do that in public and someone's watching, they'll be like, what book are you reading? Like, how do I do that? That's amazing, right? That's pretty amazing. Like, it really does work. But you have to be neutral. You have to be operating from a place of love, not fear. You have to be kind to yourself. You've got to forgive yourself. Let's do a couple of hacks too, because I really want to make sure people are also like, that's the big technique, right? That's the big one, just like the ultimate brain hack. But here's a couple that I love, and you'll know these already. But adrenaline play, unbelievably critical for ADHD kids. All kids really, but especially ADHD kids. Because what happens is that frontal lobe is understimulated. It's not getting all the electricity that it needs, right? So you have to stimulate the frontal lobe in order for the frontal lobe to come on and inhibit and organize and prioritize and motivate and do all the things that the frontal lobe needs to do, or whatever it's capable of doing at that age of your child. So, and we're still the frontal lobe, we're still the substitute frontal lobe, but they still have one. So what happens is understimulated with ADHD. So what they do is they go around looking for stimulation. And this works exactly the same way as Vyvanse and Concerta and adrenaline Concerta, whatever, all the different ADHD medications are stimulants. It lights up the frontal lobe, which is why it's paradoxical. If you give someone ADHD medication who does not have ADHD, they're going to be like, this is awesome. What do you want to do? I feel like I could do everything. How about doing this? They'll actually get hyper. You give someone who has ADHD stimulant medication and they calm down because their frontal lobe can actually do the job it's supposed to do of waiting a couple of seconds, inhibiting, screening out irrelevant behavior, learning from mistakes, making connections, all of those things. So if your child is medicated, then you will notice when the medication is wearing off, they get nasty, cranky, kind of mean, or wild. So that's a time actually when you use adrenaline play. If your child is not medicated, then you want to use adrenaline play to help medicate them, right? You want to constantly get the frontal lobe adrenaline. So in between activities, or if you on a Saturday, you go and you play adrenaline play games in the middle, in the evening after they get home from school, have a couple of adrenaline play points where you're actually medicating the brain and stimulating the brain. So it actually comes online. So this is why our kids freak out, do the same things all the time, deliberately do things they know they're going to get in trouble for, relentlessly bug their siblings. They're doing that because they're waiting for the person. I have to word this really carefully because once you're mad, it's not fun anymore. My daughter, when she was little, my youngest said, she just put it so beautifully. She said, "Mommy, I love the feeling just before I get in trouble." That's the best explanation I've ever heard, right? Once you get that adrenaline, your brain lights up, you can actually regulate a little bit better. The parent is a dish rag on the floor, or the other siblings are beside themselves, but that kid actually feels better. So adrenaline play is not just letting them run outside. That's not enough. Go play outside. That's not enough. Something where there's a chase, you're going to tickle them, you're going to get them, or anything that pops or runs out, or obstacle courses and they have to beat their time, hide and seek, games that explode or pop, or anything like that is actually what brings the adrenaline play. A lot of parents are like, are you kidding me? Like, exhausting. I don't have time to do that. Once again, you make the time because your whole evening is going to go better with this. I'm not going to say you won't have tantrums, but you'll have less tantrums if you do adrenaline play and you're connecting.
That's good for you too.
Yes, it's good for you too. So if you're really tired, sit in a chair or have a chair or a square on the carpet or something, and tell your kid you're the tickle monster, but you're not moving. But if they come near you, they're going to get such a tickle, and then they'll come near you and they'll be like, ah, and they'll try to run away. You can sit in your chair. You don't even have to move, but you're like, ah, when they come near you, right? Or you can use your phone and have music playing, silly, crazy music playing, and then you hit pause and then they have to freeze. And then you walk up to them and you see if they're moving. Like anything that gets their little hearts pounding, do that for 10 or 15 minutes. Wrestling. I don't particularly love wrestling, but if you're the kind of parent that loves wrestling, wrestling is great. Have structure and have limits because ADHD kids get wild. They also get wired, not tired. Right? So you basically have it like a hockey game. Like if you don't stop when you're asked, or if you hurt somebody, it's a penalty and you have to do 30 seconds in the penalty box. Come back in. Okay, we're playing again. And it's 3 strikes, you're out. And then the game's over. And it's not, see, you do this all the time. You always ruin everything. We were having a good time. And don't do that. It's just like, oh, well, okay. Three strikes, you're out. We'll try again later. Right? In a really calm way, not a nasty kind of way. You can even mirror and say it's so hard because your brain has so much fun and it's like spinning out on the road. Now the brakes don't work at all. Right? So you're really watching that narrative, but using adrenaline play regularly is very important. And then baby play is also super important. Rubbing noses, tickling them. And I always say to parents, the child that you least feel like doing this with is the child that needs it the most, right? So if your first instinct is, really, how long do I have to do that for? You have to do it because the connection has become frayed, not because you're not a good mother, not because you don't love your child, but because ADHD kids are tough. They're gladiators. They're relentless and exhausting, and it's never over. You have a whole day of teaching and the same day the next day, right? So that baby play is really important. You can use baby pictures. You can find little outfits and go, look what I found. You used to fit in this. It doesn't have to be a big, long thing, right? Just these moments.
And it works with teenagers too, because I do this with my son, and I'll just put on that baby voice, the one I used when he was a baby, and just, oh, I just love you so much. You're so cute, and I just love your hair. And he's like, oh, Mom.
They do. They love it. And sometimes they're like, oh my God, what are you doing? But then don't do that thing where like, I hope you have a teenager one day and they do that to you. I've loved you. Well, that's so me. Don't do that. Just go, I know. I forget that you're 13, but I do love you. And then walk away. And I guarantee you, half an hour later, they'll come, they'll give you a little bump, or they'll tease you. Like you'll get some of those connectors back. So yes, it works on teenagers. This is truly medicine. This is one of the fastest ways to get the uptake, the oxytocin uptake. And probably the final hack that I would suggest, because we're going way over, but that's okay. I always do that. Is the paradoxical effect. So if we take it back to your niece, because in that moment, it actually worked. The mirroring worked. She was great and you got it done. But sometimes they're tired, they're hungry, they're overwhelmed. And this happens a lot. I don't know if your niece has ADHD, but ADHD children will often get incredibly overwhelmed. They'll start to overload and just have this discharge of energy, just too much coming into their brain. So even if you've mirrored perfectly, they still might throw themselves on the floor and have a humongous fit. And in those moments, you've already done your mirroring. It hasn't worked. And now you use the paradoxical and you say, you know what? Throw yourself on the ground, scream and yell, kick the ground. Don't hurt anybody else, but let it out. Just let it out. Allow the tantrum. When you allow the tantrum, first of all, they don't do it usually. Usually they're like, and they're like, I'm not getting the response that I want. So this is no fun. And they stop. And even if they do, it changes the energy. And so in the middle of it, you're like, do you want to hug? Like, do you want to do a nice chest to chest hug with little kids? That can work really, really well. And they're like, yeah, even though they've just been screaming, yelling, but don't work too hard. Just let them have the freak out. It's okay. And that's a really good thing to do. If you know they've asked for something and it's a no, and it's never going to be a yes, and you've done the mirroring and they don't care, you're like, okay, throw yourself on the ground, even in a store, go ahead, have a fit, let it out. Those are real feelings. Those are real emotions, and go ahead. And not in a go ahead, fine, have your fit. It can't have that energy, right?
And something for parents to know, don't worry about what everybody else around you is thinking, because I did this when my youngest was maybe 4. He had a temper tantrum in a store, and I tried the mirroring, that didn't work. So the temper tantrum, and I said to him, that's okay, you go ahead and you have your tantrum. And the lady at the store was giving me the look, and just it's okay. Don't worry what anyone else is thinking.
No, and honestly, most of the time, especially if someone's a parent, they're like, I get you. I've been there, right? And the other thing too is we actually look worse the other way when we're doing that. You look just as crazy, but you're not doing anything about it, right? So you're right. You have to have that confidence. And if people walk by, you're like, you know what? There's going to be a show. It's going to last about 10 or 15 minutes. Just walk around. It's okay. We're good. And most people will just get it and they'll laugh, honestly. But the truth is, if you allow the tantrum, it almost never happens. Because the tantrum, like you said with your niece, is like, okay, are you sure you want to say no to me? Because it's going to get ugly, right? And then as soon as they start freaking out, you say, go ahead. They won't, they're not getting anything out of it. And even if they do, at the end of it, what does their brain remember? That was a lot of energy. I'm completely exhausted. My throat hurts from screaming. I still didn't get that thing. And I didn't even make my mom mad. Well, that was a total waste of time. Cross that off the list, because behaviors only exist when they're rewarded, right? So the worst thing you can do is start that process, let them scream and yell, then get embarrassed and give them the thing.
Yes, because we still want to set boundaries. We want to keep the boundaries, especially for kids with ADHD. They need those boundaries.
They crave those boundaries. Boundaries are love. Limits are love. I'm going to end with one analogy that I think is really going to help people, and this is the airplane analogy. So this is how important it is to be a frontal lobe. Let's say you're on an airplane, okay, and it is a bumpy, turbulent, terrifying flight. You are beside yourself, and the captain decides he's going to wander down the aisle. How's everyone doing? I can do 28,000 feet if you want. I could try 30. I could try going around the storm. What would you say to that captain? Are you crazy? Plus, you'll be terrified. Like, who is flying this plane? Who's in charge here? He's asking me. I'm a passenger. What do I know? Let's say, for the sake of argument, cockpit doors open, the captain's screaming and yelling. They're not paying me enough for this job. Why is that red button flashing? Why isn't the control tower answering me? You would absolutely be terrified, right? Remember Captain Sully, the pilot who landed the plane in the middle of the Hudson River? This is years ago. He was very calm through the whole, you want Captain Sully flying that plane, okay? So you have to channel Captain Sully, right? You can't be screaming and yelling because you're out of control if you're screaming and yelling. Plus, you're showing your kids, I can't control myself. So I guess you can't control yourself, right? They're looking at you going, well, she can't do it. So what chance do I have? I'm 6, right? If we're pleading and begging and honey, please come on, who has all the power there? And who's in charge there? Your child, right? So you have to be the captain flying the plane. And you do it from a place of love, not fear. And both of those examples I gave you, the captain going, what do you think? Like, can we do? That's from me being afraid. I want them to like me. I want it to go well. I want this. Let's get through this without a meltdown, right? When you parent from that place in your stomach of complete fear, dear God, I hope this goes well. I hope it doesn't melt down in the store. He's already won. The minute you have that thought, he's already won. You have to embrace that and go, baby, I love you. And we've been through the whole mirroring thing, but if you need to melt down, go ahead. I'll walk over here. Go ahead. And not in a sarcastic, nasty, mean way, just making space for it. And if he gets embarrassed, that's his issue, right? And the yelling captain is also angry. Yep.
I love saying to my kids, I love you enough to say no. I'm saying no because I love you.
Yep. I love you enough for you to be mad at me. The best line. And kids, honestly, most kids are like, there's not much they can say to that, right? And that's why when you deliver something in fear, there's no way you're going to that party. And if you think you're going to do that when you're, blah, blah, if it has that kind of energy that's coming from a place of anger and fear, it's never going to work. But if you're like, hey, you do all your mirroring about why they want to go to that party. And then you're like, you know what, though? I love you enough for you to be mad at me. You be as mad at me as you need to be. But I love you so much. There is no way you're going to that party. You are not old enough. You are not ready. It's not happening. And usually, even with teenagers, there'll be like an initial freak out, but it usually doesn't last very long. And they really do want to have limits, and they really want you to mean what you say and say what you mean. And half the time they're scared to go to the party anyway. So they're kind of glad you said no. Kids are so complicated. It's complicated, but to simplify it, line up with love, connect before you correct. Like, honestly, if that's huge with ADHD kids, you must connect before you correct. If you correct first, you're going to get behavior. If you connect first, it's going to go a lot better. And that's, you know what? I'm sorry. We went so much longer than we talked about going, but
you are pure gold. Like, I didn't want to stop you for a minute. We could talk forever. And I'm sure parents would like to learn more from you, so they can check out your website, connectedparenting.com.
Connectedparenting.com.
Your podcast, Connected Parenting, which I absolutely love. And I love that the episodes are about 15 minutes long. So it's a perfect length of time to listen and really learn. And the first few episodes really teach you about the calm technique and the neuroscience behind why the strategies work.
Absolutely. Yeah. And people are listening to them over and over.
Yes.
right? Which is nice, just to have that reminder.
Yes.
And then I have another podcast too. I have a podcast called the Mental Health Comedy Podcast. So I host that. I'm a co-host of that podcast with Ed Krasnick, who's a comedian. We interview well-known celebrities and entertainers and comedians about their mental health. And we offer strategies, like really brain hacks for adults on how to manage and regulate emotion. We've had Howie Mandel, Judd Apatow, Wayne Fetterman. We've had some really great guests, and we're doing that really just as a really important way to build mental health and resilience skills for adults as well. But a lot of it, you could certainly use with your kids too. So that's a fun one.
What's the name of that podcast? Sorry?
The Mental Health Comedy Podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on Believe Network, but it's on all the platforms. Like it's on whatever they all are, like Apple and Spotify, all of them. Yeah, and so there's that, and then there's the courses, which you talked about. So they're like online. There's two versions of the course. There's one where you can just watch the videos there, and I deliberately don't have charts and maps and things. Like I want you to be able to listen to it when you're on your walk or you're driving in the car, right? Like just so you don't have to, you can listen to it anywhere. So there's just videos, or there's the course that has the videos and also monthly coaching calls where I interact with everybody once a month, and then all the time on Facebook. I'll often give video answers, audio answers. People are supporting and helping each other. And that's a great community. So that's the a different version of the videos are the same, but the support is different. And then there's the teen version and the kid version. And yeah.
And can we find you on social media, on Facebook? Or?
Yeah. I'm on Facebook. There's a Connected Parenting Facebook page.
Okay.
And I'm also on Instagram as well, but I don't remember what my handle is. It's not Connected Parenting because that was taken.
Okay.
I think it's Jennifer Coleri, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. And then on the website too, there's just tons of more, there's tons of free information. There's other podcasts that I've done. There's all kinds of interviews, and just so you want to dive in and really make this part of your parenting journey.
Thank you. And you're also offering a free gift to parents in the audience, 5 Shifts of Parenting webinar. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it kind of goes into some more detail of what I talked about today, just to help parents understand the neuroscience a little bit more, really goes into limit setting. I also spend some time in that webinar talking about what happens to us as parents when you're in a couple, that we often polarize. So one becomes the parent that's like, oh, it's not his fault, he's tired. And the other one's like, this is ridiculous, we've got to do something. So it's really helping when you're parenting together, or you're co-parenting with an ex, or your mother's helping out, whatever it is, really how to kind of come to the middle so that you don't have to be on exactly the same page, but on a similar page. So there's just more detail about things like that. And it's about an hour long. So
that's amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your expertise from such a meaningful way. And I love how your strategies all come from love and neuroscience.
Yeah. Thank you.
Parents, I invite you to continue this conversation in Facebook in my group, the ADHD Village. Under the Jennifer Coleri thread, comment on what you learned today and what your next step will be. Everybody who comments will be entered in a draw to win a copy of Jennifer's book. And it's not the Connected Parenting book, it's the next book after this one. And I can't remember.
Oh, you're ruining my life.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
If you don't have it, it has all the basic stuff in it. It's just geared more for tweens and teens, and then older teens. But if you don't, you will. So don't worry. You don't teenagers now, you're going to end up with them.
Yes.
So. Yes.
Absolutely. So thank you so much again, Jennifer, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you.